Back tonight, Health Minister Dr. Joe Phaahla says 4 people have died during protests by members of the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union. He says government's legal team is considering which action to take regarding the deaths. This comes after workers affiliated to Nehawu embarked on wage-related protests this week. They've been blocking access to healthcare facilities, which resulted in patients being turned away in some instances. Are unions to be held liable for these deaths? Let's unpack this a little bit further. Andrew Levy, a labor law expert, joining us. Andrew, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus. In terms of the framework in which we are operating here, employees and trade unions, I believe, is the Labour Relations Act. Firstly, this strike, the government believes, has been interdicted. Where does then, therefore, that put the actions of what the employees and their trade unions have been embarking on?
Well, irrespective of whether the strike is interdicted or not, there is a right to strike. But those who don't want to strike have a right to go to work. But even more importantly, members of the public who are not part of the strike and who are being assaulted or interfered with or denied what might be life-saving treatment, that is absolutely unacceptable. That is gangsterism. That is not labor relations. And most certainly, if they can identify who the people are, and that's always the difficulty, because they wear masks and they try and hide, but if they can identify them, anyone can be dismissed for misconduct in the course of a strike. So they're not dismissed for striking. They're dismissed because in the course of the strike, they assaulted people, they intimidated people, they denied others the freedom that they so loudly claim for themselves. And that is absolutely ridiculous. Now, it is quite possible that there are actions against the union by the employer, by the municipalities or the provinces or the state in this case, as a result of damage or whatever. There is also a possibility that individuals who may have lost tragically family members because of this behavior, which, as I've said, is nothing but pure thuggery, they may also have an action. The difficulty is going to be to link the union to the incitement that led to these behaviors. So the question is, did the union incite its members, or did the union do everything it reasonably could have done to ensure that this sort of thing did not happen?
Yeah.
Now,
are there specific limitations of what acts can be carried out in furtherance of a protected strike, for example? And is there explicitly a sense of what would then constitute an offense? I know you're calling this thuggery, blocking of gates, taking over of operation of the gates, and so on and so forth. Union members can say, well, we are expressing ourselves and our anger in order for us to get the attention of government. So it's in furtherance of our protest action.
Yeah, well, frankly, that doesn't hold water at all. Of course you have a right to protest. Of course you have a right in our democracy to express a point of view. But what you don't have is a right to interfere with other members of the public in the exercise of their lawful activities. So you may well be angry with government. Many people are angry with government, but that doesn't justify this kind of behavior. There are other ways of doing it. It's quite unacceptable. So anyone who wants to behave in a way which would be regarded as functional to collective bargaining would protest peacefully. They would not impede access or egress from a premises. They would not compel people, particularly those in need of medical attention, to turn away. They would be there with placards. They might want to talk to people and say, look, don't go in, don't break the strike. We need your support. But the behavior that we're seeing right now, under no circumstances can ever be acceptable. Now, one's got to make the point that there are many people on strike who aren't behaving in this manner. So it's a small number of people. Yeah. But nevertheless, it's this group of people who are exercising a huge intimidatory and negative influence on all other people. And one really needs to hope that the union, if it can be shown that they either incited or did not do all they reasonably could have done to prevent this, can certainly be sued. And I, for one, would like to see that. And, you know, the sort of lame excuse that we are angry does not cut any ice at all. And it's all very well to claim, I have a right to strike. Of course you do. But you have an obligation to do so within the confines of our own constitution, which guarantees freedom to others. So it's just not acceptable. Now, on the question of, you know, could one show that the union has to some extent been negligent in not taming down this behavior, in not perhaps reducing the expectation of their members, I must express a view here. And that view says that to claim 10% and to go out on strike at 10% is an absolute, it's an act of folly, because the union knows better than anybody else that they will never, ever get 10%. They are party to all the settlements that they negotiate around the country. They know the average level of settlement has been 5 and 6%, and they know equally, and if there was a union member on the discussion with me, I would challenge him. I would say, show me 3 places where you have had a 10% increase. And of course they could not. So what that means is, yes, it's a negotiating position. And yes, we know that people ask for more than they expect to get. But at the end of the day, to have such a wide gap when you go on strike, and what I would have liked to have seen is people sitting down and negotiating until they could get no further, until the gap was smaller. And the one thing we can say is all strikes end one day.
Yes.
And they will almost always end with a concession on both sides. But if one party is refusing to move at an extreme position and the other party is also at an extreme position, then it makes it very, very difficult to try and find a solution. So I think that there is really behavior which is questionable. And if the union has in any event encouraged its members that 10% is possible, then that is wrong. On the other hand, if the union members are saying, we demand 10% and your job is to go and get us what we want, the unions also have a responsibility to say, guys, that's not feasible, not in this economy, not in this climate, not in this time. And so I think there is a lot of behavior and activity in and around this strike which is really just showing how dysfunctional our labor relations can be at times.
Let's talk about that a bit, Andrew, the labor relations. Essential Service Committee, is it doing its job here? I believe part of it is to determine a whole or a part of whatever service, whether it is to be considered an essential service. And there seems to be no clear understanding there, or maybe there is an understanding and it's just blatant disregard of where that line is, as far as healthcare services are concerned.
Look, I think there is some disregard, but there is some blurring. I mean, for example, there would be many, many jobs done by Nehawu members which are not life-critical. And, in fact, they could find supplies elsewhere. They could get, if one takes cooking and catering, yes, people have got to eat, but, if the strikers won't do it, well, we can find an alternative source. However, theatre staff, when a child has appendicitis and is told to come back next week, by which stage, God forbid, he may be dead. That is different. Now, my view of the Essential Services Committee is that it's a good structure under the LRA, but it's far too slow. It does not deal fast enough, and it does not deal definitively enough with the issues. Now, I have a memory in the back of my mind that there is a court case which indicates that workers who are direct frontline health workers, in other words, they're hands-on in saving lives at a public hospital, a state hospital, are essential workers. They may not strike. The ancillary members around them, probably not. So it's hard to know who is causing the intimidation and turning people away. But, whether they are an essential worker or not, it doesn't matter. The mere act of that misconduct is enough to have them dismissed. And I think the sad thing is that a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and they won't find new ones, and that a lot of people will lose money for this strike, and they could have settled at a more achievable level than this 10%.
Yeah.
I mean, it also begs the question of, is the government going to cave in? We don't know. So we're going to have to watch that one with interest.
Andrew, there is, of course, talk of people being arrested on the picket line, and unions are saying, well, the minister is using that to intimidate workers. As you've put it, we have a right, constitutional right, international law right, human right to strike action. Can they be arrested?
Of course they can. But they can't be arrested for the act of striking. If they're striking peacefully, if they're complying with the strike rules, if they're exercising their constitutional right to protest and picket in a way that is respectful of the rights of others, they are protected. But the minute they step over the line, then they are not protected. And this kind of rhetoric which says the minister's trying to intimidate us is just completely without truth. Completely without truth. And I was reading a comment by Nehawu, organized a little while ago, that the minister, whom they called a nincompoop, which is rather a delightful old-fashioned word, was trying to intimidate them with court action. Well, just think about that for a moment. The courts are there to uphold the law. They're not there to intimidate you. They're to deal with people who break the law. And if you break the law, well, there are consequences. So, I think a lot of this rhetoric is trying to win a war of words. And I hope that, people can see through the fluff and the flack on both sides to see this for what it is. And it's not difficult for us to understand. We all know we have a right of peaceful process. And you don't need to be a lawyer or a lecturer or whatever the case may be to understand that you may have a right to protest, but you don't have a right to stop me going about my lawful activities. And I think... Sorry, carry on.
Andrew, let's leave it there. Much appreciation because of time pressures. Appreciate you, and thank you very much for coming on. Andrew Levy, labor law expert. They're breaking it down for us in terms of what would constitute an offense when you are carrying out or furtherance of a protest action.